Hey, this is Sandy.
And Randy.
And we're here on AT Corner.
Being an athlete trainer comes with ups and downs, and we're here to showcase it all.
Join us as we share our world in sports medicine.
Welcome back to another episode of AT Corner. For this week's episode, we have a very exciting interview on the expanding role of balance and cognitive testing.
You know, when you think balance and cognitive testing, what's the first thing you think?
I would say concussion.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking too. But as we figure out in this episode, there is so much more to balance testing and cognitive testing beyond concussion, which I think is what makes this so exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Literally after you said it, I kind of was thinking, I was like, you could apply that to a lot of different things in some way, shape, or form.
Right. So we have two very special guests today, which is also pretty cool because we don't usually have two guests at once. But
That's true.
We do have kind of best of both worlds. We have a PT and an AT.
Nice.
You want to introduce them?
Yes. So our first guest is Kim Wyand. She received her DPT degree from Springfield College, now working in outpatient orthopedic setting with sports teams. She specialized in concussion management and vestibular rehabilitation. She works with Sway as the Director of Customer Experience. And, fun fact, she is married to an athletic trainer.
I know someone married to an athletic trainer.
Hey, me too.
We also have Casey Paulk. He received his bachelor's in AT from Southwestern Oklahoma State University, and then his master's in career and technical education as well from Oklahoma State University. Though he's practiced in several settings for the past 18 years, I'm sure you know his name because he serves half of the U.S. as the Sway sales executive. Or you might know him because he's also the Oklahoma Athletic Trainers Association president.
Okay, yeah, so some people might know him.
Yeah,
but also
just a little.
Serving half the U.S., that's a big range.
Yes.
For sales.
Right. So whether you use Sway now or if you don't yet, why don't we get to know Kim and Casey? Randy, want to start us off?
Yes. So, as with any starting interview, guys, go with the cryo breakers. So, what is your athletic training muse? This could be any modality, rehab tool, tape, braces, etc. Any tool of the trade that represents you.
Or physical therapy.
Yes.
Muse.
Oh, yeah. You can go first, Casey.
Oh, man.
I need a little time.
I could say Sway. I think, like, for an athletic trainer, it's like your hands, right? Like, I think you can do so many different things with your hands, manual therapies, things like that. And then you could be sentimental and say, your heart and soul. And remember, ATC stands for all things covered, so we can do everything.
There it is.
Got it in there.
Oh, that's it. That was good. And that I used to say that too. Like, I don't know, when I would play, volleyball or whatever sports, like, after college, and I like be afraid of getting injured myself. Like, these hands are my livelihood. I need these. So yeah, that's a good one, Casey. All right, I'll be a little just more boring, I guess, like on like, in the rehab world. And one of the things I grew to, use a lot across so many different, patient populations is blaze pods. Talked about them, plenty before, but I found so much utility and just fun, whether it's like an older adult, like literally just trying to make sure they don't fall in their bathroom, or the sports concussion vestibular patients. I found like so many fun uses for them, and it's just really your creativity is, your mind's the limit of how you want to use those type of tools. So I guess that would be like my rehab muse.
Yeah, really versatile.
Yeah.
You can go really any way with it.
I'm very surprised blaze pods haven't come up before.
You're right. Blaze pods is a new one for us.
That was pretty cool.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they're fun.
Why don't we kick it off with a story or experience or case study, some life hack or something about cognitive testing?
Sure. Well, I'll start, and this one relates a little bit more to balance. I was thinking about this, and really one of my favorite cases from when I was treating in an outpatient orthopedic practice in the Philly area. I had a young girl come in. She was a gymnast, and she was just coming in for an ankle sprain. I had seen her like a year prior, also for an ankle, just one of those kind of repetitive ankle sprains. And this time she came in, and I said, did you keep up with your exercises, the hip strengthening, the core, all the stuff we talked about, last
Mm-hmm.
time I saw you? And it turns out, after digging into this particular mechanism of injury, uh, she sustained a concussion.
Mm.
And, she wasn't coming to me for that. I happened to be the concussion specialist at my clinic. So it worked out that I was able to, just dive into that. But this particular case just fit the bill of, increased risk of lower extremity injury
Mhm.
after a concussion. And then, and at the time, this is when I was using Sway in the clinic as well as with our, high school and middle school contracts. It was the perfect time to use Sway. I didn't have force plates or any way to like objectively measure balance.
Mm-hmm.
And as a gymnast, like her balance
Mhm.
was above the norm, like, her baseline balance. And I didn't have a baseline on her. That would have been too, picture perfect. But I was at least able to get a starting balance of where she was injured. And
Mm-hmm.
then over her course of therapy, keep watching her improve. And by the end, she was in the, 99th percentile
Oh,
for her
sweet.
age and sex. But like she still had some, lingering issues with her performance because the flips and the tricks in her vestibular system wasn't, her ankle was theoretically okay, but there
Mm-hmm.
were other components, lingering from this concussion that essentially went undiagnosed. I shouldn't say undiagnosed. She was cleared early. Everyone was like, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
you're fine from the concussion," but the
Mhm.
level that she had to perform at, and I mean, she's just a high school, freshman gymnast. She's not like elite level here, but
Mm-hmm.
the demands of that sport are just so different than, volleyball, lacrosse, or
Mhm.
whatnot. So I don't know. That's one of my favorite cases from from my past that I think about often.
It's funny how she found her way to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she was a repeat patient. I had seen her, years prior, but never for a head injury, just for lower extremity, that after school rush in PT clinics. It's like busiest from, 3:30 to, 7 p.m. And you get all
Mm-hmm.
the athletes in at one time. And it's just like the AT room. It's a great time.
For that concussion, how long was she like returned to play before you saw her? If you remember.
So she was cleared. So I think at the time of the head injury, she went to the ED,
Mhm.
and then was told like, oh, go see your pediatrician. And she was reporting no symptoms. That's all they were really
Mm.
doing. And they were like, okay, like you're fine. And then a few weeks later, she sprained her ankle really bad. Um, so she never saw like a concussion specialist
Yeah.
or anyone further than ED pediatrician. And that's the tough part of
Mhm.
pediatricians. Like they have to be aware of so many things, and that might
Mm-hmm.
just not be something that you picked up on. And this is
Yeah.
pre-consensus statement. So the
Oh,
Amsterdam
okay.
consensus statement just came out, the SCOT 6,
Mhm.
the new SCAT 6. There's so many new tools for providers that maybe aren't as well versed in concussion as a specialist would be. So I would love, if I don't want this case to happen again, but if this was the scenario, maybe that pediatrician could have been exposed to the SCOT 6, had some ideas about how to just surface level manage a concussion, or know at
Mhm.
least to pick out the signs.
For sure.
All right, you want me to talk about a cool cognitive test story or whatever?
Let's do it.
It's one of a customer that we have, a friend of mine, and it's in rodeo specifically, like bull riding. And so I ran into my buddy who works for the does professional rodeo, and he was just like, "Hey, I got a story for you." All right, he said it was kind of this correlation. He said we had this bull rider that got a concussion, and going through return to play, their process, he was they were looking at the sway data and everything else in their clinical evaluations and everything they were doing in their protocols, and everything was looking really really good, like coming up to within normal limits, the balance but his reaction time test specifically was still like below norms, like still decreased in performance. So they were like, you're just not he was the same thing. I don't have these symptoms. I'm feeling really good. Everything else is backed up with the normal limits, but this reaction time is still low. And the rodeo cowboy, the bull rider, said, well, he finally opened up and was honest. And he said, where I live is like a rural part of New Mexico. And I live in a trailer house, and there's lots of flies around, the barn or the house or whatever. So I used to always train myself to catch flies. Like that's how he would train reaction time for himself, like Mr. Miyagi kind of stuff with chopsticks. He would
Wow.
reach and grab flies. And I'm like hooked into this story, and I'm like, all right. So he said, yeah, I could catch 10 out of 10 flies, like, see it, catch it. He said, but now since I've had my injury, I'm down to like 2 out of 10. So
Ooh.
I was like, so you're telling me the correlation between the sway reaction time scores and his ability to catch flies is correlated. I was like, this is a cool research study we need to start doing, is find all people. So he's like, so once he started getting better, he could see himself catching more flies. And I'm like, that's such a great story. Number one, there's so many pieces to that story that are hilarious and fun, but like great at the same time. We're like, yeah, okay, that tracks with bull riders and catching flies. And so that's one of my
He
favorite
literally
stories.
did a real life reaction.
Real
He
life
really did
reaction
a
time.
real life reaction test
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you ever
It
want
does
to
not get more functional than
It
that.
does not get more functional than that, because and it makes sense. If you're a bull rider, it's a completely reactionary sport, because if you don't have good reaction time as a bull rider, you're not holding on for 8 seconds. You're not a professional bull rider
No.
anymore. So I thought that was pretty awesome that, they do all kinds of different types of trainings and different things, but I never would have thought catching flies would have been one of those things. But that's one of my favorite stories that I've heard from friends of mine that are athletic trainers that use sway.
Bull riding and gymnastics, those are both highly
Yeah.
vestibular activities. And you
Yeah.
just, if you look at, obviously sports are very vestibular and there's like a lot going on, but it's really cool to see when we're talking about like deficits and what role kind of a concussion plays. You can really highly see it in these activities that are more towards that extreme.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. You know what? That should have been my muse, is the vestibular organ. I mean, I got a
Ooh.
picture of it back here. It's like, I think it's like the unsung hero of the body. Casey's heard me go off on, spiels on this, but it's the size of a dime, and you got one on each side, and it's like the most amazing organ, in my opinion.
And if it gets thrown out of whack, you're all out of whack.
Yeah.
Yes, you're you're screwed. I mean, it's so important, and no one realizes it until something's wrong.
Yeah.
So actually, speaking of that, can we talk about the role that balance plays within concussion?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I love it. And so balance is one of my favorite things to talk about with patients, and just educating. This can go from educating parents to athletes to patients to older adults. It doesn't matter. We all use balance. And the 3 components of balance are your eyes, your inner ear, your vestibular system, and then your proprioception, or I'll say to patients, like your joints, or just the way your body can talk to your brain. And the most important thing is your brain has to take input from all 3 of those systems: eyes, inner ear, body and joints. And normally your brain can just process it and bing, bang, boom, do what you want, turn around real quick, no problem. But when there's an injury to the brain, to the thing that has to take input from all those systems, as well as do a million other things that, your brain does, that's why there's so many, not even just balance, but that kind of fogginess, or I'm on a boat, or that visual, perception issues. There's so many things that, your brain's doing. And when there's an injury to the brain and that energy demand, your brain can't do its normal functions, because it costs more energy to do that. That's the link. It's trying to manage that demand of what it normally could do when it was healthy, but then there's an injury, and it can't do all those functions, take in all that input, and do the right outputs.
For sure. So now, going away from the brain to kind of like expanding that view, what about for other pathologies, maybe outside of concussion? How does balance play a role into that?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, just when it comes to, I mean, I guess there's so many things that balance can play a role in if you're thinking like, stroke or more, serious injuries or just in general aging. Like balance for people becomes obviously a serious, risk as you get older, or even just recovering from any type of injury. Like I would always say to my athletes going through, an ACL or older folks with a knee replacement, like something was altered in your body, especially any type of surgery, right? Something was altered in your body. Now that joint, whether it's, the sprained ankle or the knee, the replaced knee, like that part of the body needs to get reacquainted with the brain. Like your brain and that joint need to talk to each other. They have to get to know each other again and how to work properly. Here I am still relating it to the brain. But, I mean, I don't know. That's kind of what it comes down to. And balance obviously plays a role in that. You have to relearn how to integrate that part of your body to all your, balance activities.
You're talking about like gymnasts and bull riders and athletic trainers, like needing to really know what that athlete has to do and like what's unique to that athlete. And everybody is different. Number one, every athlete is different. Every body is different. And, sometimes that's the challenge, is that depending on what setting you're in as an athletic trainer and the bandwidth that you have, the support that you've got as far as other staff, or you by yourself, you might not be able to do very in-depth stuff. And that's where like having a great relationship with a physical therapist, like let's say Kim, I can refer over, you need to go do this, this, and this. Like, Kim, teach me what I need to do, like a quick snapshot evaluation test to identify if that's really bad, then that means I need to just come to you. If it's not really bad, I might be able to handle it myself, but we work together on that. And so, I think as athletic trainers, there was always this, we knew how to make balance testing, or not really balance testing, but like rehabs harder for athletes. We knew that like if you start out with the basic flat ground, eyes open, barefooted and count to 10, or the longer they can go without moving all over the place, the better their balance was. All right, well, now we learn to take away things, like have them stand on an unstable surface, just with that, and then have them close their eyes. Like that's going to be the next level harder, right? But we never really, at least me thinking back to when I was in college or in undergrad, was like, we were never really taught the inner ear and the vestibular system, and this is what was happening. We just knew, like, just do these things, right? But we were never taught like why, or like this is going on. Maybe we were, and I just wasn't paying attention. Who knows? That could have been the case. And then then you see the fun, cool stuff, right? Like, okay, now we're going to stand on a Bosu ball and you're going to kick a soccer ball because you're a soccer player, or you're going to catch a football. Like, how can we make it harder and challenging so that they're ready to go back out on the field? It's going to decrease the injury, and all those things. But just thinking about balance and the better strength you've got. Should we do a functional movement screen on these athletes? Do I know how to do a functional movement screen? Is it really going to decrease? Now we're doing research. Like but that all depends on like the support you've got to go with it, and time and the setting that you're in. Again, it's like, I'd love to be able to do all these things and do all these ACL prevention things and FIFA 11, but like if the coaches aren't going to buy into it, then it's going to be a waste of my time. If the athletes aren't going to buy into it, it's going to be a waste of my time.
Right.
I've already got so many things that are taking time away from us as a setting and as an athletic trainer. So yeah, that's just one thing. And you kind of think back to Kim's story about the gymnast. It's like, you feel bad that she got hurt. You said she hurt her ankle really bad, like she sprained it really bad after she was cleared from the concussion, and thinking, what if that would have been handled better? Then maybe she would have avoided the really bad ankle sprain.
Yeah.
Yeah. And mind you too, this is club gymnastics. They don't have an ATC at her club. Yeah. I mean, it was just the coach saying, well, you're out.
My daughters do gymnastics, so I am the club AT.
Yeah. That's what it turns into.
That's what it turns into.
Yep.
Yeah.
All the other parents start having questions for you, huh?
Yeah. And I'm watching the coaches tape ankles and stuff, and I'm thinking, can't say anything. Should I say something? Like, do I want to? I don't know.
Get in there.
Yeah.
So, Casey, you kind of went into it a little bit, but how can an athletic trainer assess those deficits in balance?
So with sway, the best way to assess is to use our MBES assessment, right? So any kind of mobile device, hold it to the chest, have the athlete go through all the different stances. If you don't have sway, maybe you've got a force plate or a Biodex biosway machine, but that depends on the setting that you're in. I never had either one of those years ago. I only see that like in the college settings, or if you're at a college setting that has a lab that is doing some research on this kind of thing, right? I've got friends that are doing these in different settings, like at different colleges throughout the country, which is really cool. But what are they really evaluating? Maybe the functional movement screening, like the FMS, but
or just the pen and paper best. I mean, it's still on the stat.
Yep. And that's the thing. But like, are you really measuring that at baseline, or are you doing that post?
Yeah.
And we all know, like, well, I don't know what was normal for you before I did this, so maybe next year I'll do this before, and then I'll have to go back and look at it. So I don't know, man. That's a great question. I would want to pose that to different settings of athletic trainers. Like, if you're in the secondary school setting, and are you even evaluating balance? And if you are, for what reason?
Do you have the time?
Do you have the time?
Right.
If you're at a collegiate setting, we work with our this neuropsychologist that we have on staff, and we have
or strength and conditioning, like they could take that over. I mean,
there's
it's really so dependent.
Because is it injury prevention, right? Like if I'm working on injury prevention, I've got to have a good relationship with my strength and conditioning coach or team. I don't have a strength and conditioning coach. I'm at a small high school, right? We don't even have a school nurse. So everything's a little different. You are strength and conditioning. You are athletic trainer. You are science teacher and counselor and bus driver, but
all things covered.
All things covered, right? Everything. Yep. You got to do it all. There's a university in the SEC that has a multi-million-dollar grant with the NFL. So they do a very in-depth evaluation baseline of let's say concussion, but they can use the data for all different kinds of things. So it's, cognitive testing, it's driving. They use simulated baseline driving tests, the balance. So they can use a force plate, and they have all these resources, and they have a team of people who are running that. So that athletic trainer on staff probably doesn't even have to worry about it. It's like, if anything is a concussion, you go see these people and they handle it.
That just kind of reminds me of the athletic trainers who work with NASCAR or just race car drivers in general, because they have any alterations in reaction time, or if they have any post-concussion deficits, just like the gymnastics and the rodeo, like it is a very highly vestibular and very highly cognitive activity.
I agree.
Yeah, for sure.
I would say the military too, depending on the setting that those guys are in.
Yeah.
I always like those videos of they're doing the G-force training to see like how they can handle G-forces.
The resources too. I feel like we keep going to Kim's story, but like the resources, like that does make a big difference, because again, maybe if the pediatrician had that resource or knew about the resource, right, the initial management would have been different. So yeah, resources do play a pretty big role in a lot of things.
I think in terms of that, it falls a lot on the AT or the PT shoulders of, sometimes educating the, pediatrician down the street, the school nurse, the, parents on the sideline of, this is the way we do things. This is the way research is moving. This is, and we're always, I feel like, the connectors of everyone. You're calling the doctor, you're calling the parent, you're calling the guidance counselor. It's just everyone.
And athletic trainers in a secondary school setting always complain, I feel like, or it's always like that pain that a kid gets hurt in club sports, and then they come see the athletic trainer at afternoon and are like, hey, can you check me out? I sprained my ankle. Oh, how'd you sprain your ankle? Oh, gymnastics. And you're like, I can't take care of all of your club sports injuries on top of school. Right. Like, I'm paid to be here to take care of athletic injuries that happen at school. Like, you need to go see Kim, like I have. So yeah, like educating everybody, it's like super hard. And that's like a big secondary schools, or not secondary, but the youth sports athletes. That's like the biggest population of kids and your highest injury rates. And they're kind of just left unattended and unlucky unless you're playing at a high level of club and you have access. somebody's taking care of you, but you're paying a lot of money to do all that stuff for sure.
I would say resources.
Yeah.
Resources.
Again, back to it.
Back to it.
But regardless of resources, when would an injury cue you to actually jump in and assess that balance? Because you think concussion and you're going to assess that balance. It just kind of goes hand in hand. But Kim, like for example, for your gymnast, what made you think like ankle sprain, let me assess this balance and see if
You were concussed.
exactly.
I'm trying to remember with her case. I mean, with an ankle sprain, I'm assessing balance anyways,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm,
Like no
mhm.
matter what. And I really think the concussion piece came up from the subjective history, from me just diving into like how she injured her ankle. What was it, on the beam or the bars, or she said it was on a floor routine, and she
Mhm.
was, practicing for a competition, and it was one of her like normal stunts, and the way she like injured it, she was like, yeah, I just like on my final flip, and I have no gymnastics background, so for anyone listening, like, sorry, I'm butchering these terms, but for on the final, flip dismount trick, she, misjudged where the corner of the mat was, and she went flying off of it, and landed on her leg, like, leg crumbled underneath her, basically. Thank God she didn't have a knee injury. It was really just her ankle, but she
Oof.
also, and I probably hit her head a second time, but she said before that, like, her floor routine is what was giving her the issues.
Mm.
And so hearing the floor, like repetitive, flips, tumbles, that made me think, inner ear, got to talk about this. And then obviously just my training from the concussion standpoint, I'm always just in tune to ask those questions.
Right.
Yeah. I was telling Kim earlier before we got started, as athletic trainers, I think the older we get and the more experience in the year, and this is probably for PTs as well, same, right? And Kim's husband, who's an athletic trainer, I always like to throw that in there for Dan. But when we were young in our profession, I know myself, it was like if somebody came in with a shoulder injury, it was just start doing all the special tests that we ever learned, right? It was like, we're doing every special test. And then you start to figure out, like, if you'll just ask a really good history and specific questions, you can probably narrow it down to one or two of the things, do one test, and then be like, boom, that's exactly what it is. Because there's so many different patterns. But on the same, I had a case the other day for a high school football athlete at a rural town in Oklahoma, no athletic trainer, really small school, and everybody's connected. So my buddy is friends with them, and they reached out to him and said that his kid had a potential concussion. So he called me because of what I do. So I reached out and talked to him. They did a remote sway test for me, and we went over the results like in real time. And I'm looking at his balance tests first, and I'll look at each individual stance that they did, and I look at the data, and and I noticed that everything looked really good. Like the scores were pretty high, meaning he had really good stability and balance, except for like one side, like the left side. It wasn't equal bilateral, right? It was decreased on the left side. So everything else was looking really good. Like even the cognitive tests were looking really good. And I said, so just a question, have you ever had an injury to like your left leg, like a left foot, a left ankle, a knee, maybe a hip? And he was like, well, yeah, like a year and a half ago, I broke my left ankle. I didn't get into the details. It was maybe a distal fib fracture or something like that. Who knows what, because that's kind of common. But anyway, I was like, okay, great to know. I wouldn't have asked that question if I didn't see this data that pointed me to ask that question. So this decrease in balance, I don't think is related to your inner ear vestibular concussion. I think it's related to a decrease because of that injury that you had. You're at a small high school. You probably don't have very many resources. I know you don't have an athletic trainer. Where's the closest PT? What do I know about your family, your dad, your mom? Are they blue collar people who are kind of like, just get tough. You'll be fine. Do these exercises. I'm sure. Just start walking, get out there. They don't know how to do balance, whatever. So it was really cool to be able to like identify that and say, that might be something you should work on, right? Like, how can you improve your balance without anybody there? Here's some ideas. while you're getting dressed in the morning and you're putting your socks on and your shoes on, stand on one
Brush
foot.
your
while you're
teeth
doing
standing
it.
on
Brush
one
your
foot.
foot
Yeah.
on one
Uh-huh.
foot. Close your eyes, and
Yes.
so it was pretty
I
cool
love
to
that.
like
I used to
identify
tell people
that.
that all the time.
Yeah, like stand on one foot while you're getting dressed, or when
Yeah.
you're standing in line to check out
Yep.
at Target or Walmart, like stand on one foot. So
Yeah.
I always say
kinda
you're
cool.
putting stuff in the microwave. It's an automatic timer. You can stand on one foot.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yes.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Get this. I used to tell my older patients to use, I don't have a timer at home. Use the microwave. And then one old lady came back to me. She goes, I broke my microwave, just so you know.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. Because she was like,
She want you to pay for her
hitting it. I
microwave?
don't know. No. But yeah, that one, the microwave came back to bite me one time.
Bill
That
insurance.
is funny.
Bill insurance.
So
Oh, man.
going along with Casey's story, so once you kind of identified those deficits in balance, and I think we've kind of mentioned it, like ATs, I feel like have a pretty good idea of like, okay, here's how we're going to attack balance. But what are some tips that you would have to say work on those balance deficits? Like apparently the microwave could be one.
I think one thing I used to tell people was obviously if they didn't have an AirX pad at home,
Mhm.
it was like find an unstable surface to stand on. And I learned that pillows weren't that great. Sounded great, but as soon as you step on a pillow, it like just flattens out and you're standing on the surface pretty much. It was like fold up a towel, like, but obviously stand in a corner to be safe. I was like fold up a towel, and then if that's really easy, close your eyes, like simple stuff. I would,
Move your
I
head.
would, yeah. Oh, see, no, I never do that because I never knew that was a thing. I've learned a ton of stuff from Kim in the short time she's been working for Sway about like, she says these words and I'm like, I don't know what that means, VMS, VOR, visual motion sensitivity. And I'm like, Kim, I'm just an athletic trainer. I don't know what that means.
For anyone, like it just comes down to like going back to anatomy and physiology. It doesn't matter if you're talking balance or if you're talking, an exercise for your knee. You got to know how the quad and hamstring work together, how the knee joint, it's just a hinge joint, but there is a little bit of rotation. Like if you, and for me too, kinesiology, anatomy, those were a long time ago. I don't remember the origin and insertion of anything. But like if you just can remember, and sometimes you got to brush up on it, the principles behind things. And for balance, it's those three components: eyes, inner ear, proprioception or somatosensory system. Like if you know those three things, you can make up any balance intervention. You can challenge your athletes and your patients to do anything by manipulating those three things. And Casey, even though he doesn't know the big words, he says it all the time. Oh, I have my athletes stand on one foot, or I make them close their eyes. Like you're halfway there. You're already doing it.
Well, I was thinking about stories, and I was at a theme park, and I don't ride roller coasters anymore. I'm just thinking I'm just old. I don't like to roller. They make me nauseous now. They used to not.
It's a challenge your vestibular system.
Dude, okay. And I really just kind of just gave up on it. And I was like, I'm just not going to ride rides. I'll be that dad that just pushes his stroller around, sits on the bench, watches the kids, enjoys the weather and some food. And I'm like, I can't ride rides because I get I don't get motion sick driving in a car, right? On boats, none of that stuff, flying in planes, nothing, but riding roller coasters, just like, and about a year and a half ago, I was up in Missouri at Silver Dollar City in Branson. And I rode a ride for some reason. I thought I rode something that was not going to mess me up, but it kind of did. And I texted Becky Bliss, right, who's a PT friend of mine that's a vestibular PT, neuro PT. And I was like, why does it bother me to ride roller coasters? And she gave me this. She texted me back with this very long, big word, scientific explanation. And I said, all right, you're going to have to dumb that down for me. She said, basically, what you do every day is you're sitting down, you're looking at a computer screen, and you're not challenging your vestibular system as much as you used to, right? Like I don't play sports anymore. Like I don't do all these activities, I don't know. So I need to start doing more of what Kim said. Like I think athletic trainers, we're the worst patients, right? We all know this.
Yes.
We will tell you everything you need to do. We will not do it ourselves, right?
No.
Your ergonomics are terrible. Yeah, that's okay. Just do as I say, not as I do. It's one of my favorite things I used to say to people. So yeah, anyway, but learn something new every day.
For sure.
So we've talked a lot about balance, but I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk more about cognition. How can, what does that cognition role play in, like, for example, a concussion?
Yeah. I mean, I think cognition, especially to, ATs and PTs and really any health professions outside of like neuropsychologists who like
Mm-hmm.
that's all they studied, and maybe OTs. I've worked with some great occupational therapists that have, you know, done further studies in or just, courses and whatnot in cognitive therapy. But I personally feel, for the PT, AT, and, other folks out there that don't get that specialized training in it, it almost feels like the great unknown, um of like, oh, like, it's not something I could put my hands on. Like,
Yeah.
I can't test your, you know physically, I guess, with what your reaction time is, or things of that nature. And that's what, as a clinician, drew me to Sway initially, was, okay, this gives me a simple way to get a glimpse of someone's cognition. In the clinic, I wasn't doing cognitive therapy myself. I would, you know incorporate cognitive tasks into my intervention. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, one of my favorite ones, I would have a kid on a Bosu ball. We would be throwing tennis balls back and forth, and then when they were ready, I would have them, count backwards. If they were taking Spanish in school, like, count backwards in Spanish, or count the amount of times of reps we got in a row. So incorporating, dual, like, cognitive tasks into, different interventions was something I was doing, but I never really had a way to measure, is that
Mm-hmm.
having an effect on their cognition. So, the ability to, at least for me, to use Sway to get, benchmarks of where they're at, I loved it because it felt like, a mystery to me before that. Um, and obviously, you think reaction time in sports, like, it's pretty self-explanatory to explain to an athlete or a parent how important reaction time is. And,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm working with like the catcher, or, literally any athlete, like, your reaction time should be better than this if you're going to go back and sit in the goal and wait for a lacrosse ball to come flying at you at 100 miles an hour, or what.
Right.
For sure.
So
I would say, like, back when I was practicing our cognitive tests, it made me basically think, do you know where you're at? Like, are they cognitively aware that they know where they're at? So it's like, what day it is. This is basic stuff. What day is it? What month is it? What time is it? Within 30 minutes, and then I remember one of my sports medicine fellows or sports medicine docs was doing one time, and he said, is Mickey Mouse a cat or a dog? And in my head, I was like, cat. But then the kid was like, neither. And I was like, oh, crap. I even got that wrong. Like, I wasn't paying attention, and then, then it kind of comes to like, okay, scats. Like, I think we could all do a scat in our head, at least. You get the months of the year in reverse order, and you start doing the numbers in reverse order. And, like elbow, apple, carpet, saddle, bubble. Like, that's one kind of fun thing, is like, what are your 5 words? Everybody has a list of 5 words, every athletic trainer,
Mm-hmm.
I think. And then now it's 10 words. But I think Kim's spot on when it comes to sports and like reaction time. I never really gave it too much thought until learning more, like working for Sway and getting really into the in depth and all these different things, and talking to some other clinicians that I know, like you said, neurologists, neuropsychologists, sports neuropsychologists, and like your eyes are the how you intake data. Your brain can't absorb information from outside. It's all got to come through the eyes. And if you don't have good visual processing speed, then if you can't absorb that data, anything that's coming in, then the next domino is not going to be, it's going to fall too, right? So there's going to be a decrease there. So your neuromotor response. So the brain telling the muscles to move, all right, and then the brain telling the muscles to not move, or when to move, which is like saying sports. So Kim always gives me a hard time. I'm like the master of analogies. I try to try and get people to understand like this complex thing. Like, I try and take everything that Kim teaches me, and I try and put it in athletic trainer words when I'm talking to an athletic trainer. So, and another and I'll get to another story here in a second, but is like, it helps that athletic trainer be able to explain to that athlete and to that coach and to that parent, like it can't just stop with me. It's got to go. That education's got to continue to go on. So like, I want to understand and be able to be a knowledgeable person to be able to explain this information. So then, like, what challenges do they run into? And getting accurate information, like, and like consistent data and accurate data, usable data in the event of the injury that might occur. And I used to tell athletic trainers, like, okay, if you've been using a computerized cognitive test and now you're switching to our program, which is, app based and the kids get to use their phones. That's like, yes, now I'm not in the computer lab anymore. Now I can, do this testing way more flexible around my time, right? Around the coach's time. And these are the challenges with that, blah, blah, blah. And then it was like, okay, cool. So how do you get the kids to buy into it? And you tell them, like, well, hey, the better you do, the faster you'll get done. And I used to think that would work. And it kind of did. It helped. But then I was looking at the data and I'm learning all these things about reaction time and how it relates to sports and like what's important to a high school athlete. Playing the sport, like being on the field, is important to the high school athlete. So then we started looking at the normative data and how our data things. And I said, I'm going to experiment the next time I do baseline testing. So I said, listen, athletes, I'm going to be able to look at this data with your coaches, and we're going to be able to compare you to everyone else on the team. And we're going to be able to work on the depth chart and figure out like who actually should probably be on the field playing, like who's first string, who's second string, based on this cognitive data. Because like in the combine, when they go to the NFL combine, they do bench press and broad jump and all these different physical tests. And like the quarterbacks do like the Wonderlic test. Like they do that cognitive, how smart are you test, I guess. So I'm like, well, why can't we do that at the high school level, club level, high school level, college level, and help? So then what I noticed is when I said those words to these athletes, they were like, I got their attention. They're like, I'm like, yeah, like I can look at this and say like, this guy on paper, on the data, he looks like he's probably going to be making better decisions on the field. You can evaluate his physically and like all the other things that only a coach can evaluate, but I can help you evaluate this data and what that means from a cognitive and neuromotor, like brain and body and movement and all that stuff. Like this kid's got a higher ceiling, or he's probably gonna be able to do this, this, and this. So did I do that? Maybe a little bit, or evaluating them. But it's, trying to get a high school kid to do what you ask them to do, go to sleep before midnight, turn their phone off and use it a little less, eat better, drink more water. There's just so many challenges that go into that.
Right.
For sure. Kind of alluding to that again, man, the segues here have been just on point. What about going outside of the concussion, right? Like what other pathologies could kind of influence that reaction time or the other cognitive factors?
I'm going to start. My parents got older and they'd go to the doctor and they have to get the fall risk assessment, basically. They're over 65 and they'd go get these Medicare wellness visits. And I was learning what is that like, and they were like, well, they ask you, if you've ever fallen in the last year. And if you say no, then the doctors move on to the next question. Right. And so Sway came out with a functional, like 30-second sit to stand test, which is a PT driven. Nice. Like that's not something athletic trainers were doing because I wasn't. I was like, why am I doing this? And it's an assessment of this. And then we created the CDC 4-stage balance test, which is for older patient populations. And then we add our reaction time to that. And those 3 tests were like our fall risk assessment. So then Kim loves fall risk. She and I will get into like, we love it. And we're talking about it, and people in our company have to like pull us back. But I'm like, well, everybody always wants guinea pigs, right? Like I can test my daughters on the cognitive concussion side with Sway. And then I was like, well, my parents, like I know a ton of older people who are over 65. It's like parents, guinea pigs, perfect. So the next time I go home, hey guys, FYI, you're going to do this test. And I'll never forget it. I had my mom do the MBES, which is eyes closed. And I was there with her watching her do this. And after the first tandem stance, I was like, this is unsafe. Like, she does not need to be doing this. Like, she could fall right now while she's doing the test. So we stopped it, and then we did the CDC 4-stage with her eyes open. And I was just like, man, this is really cool. And then you start to learn that older adults act very similar to an athlete who might be concussed, as far as being honest with clinicians, right, Kim? Like, they won't tell. I'll say this, and this is what I've learned, and I assume, is that they don't want to tell somebody that they have maybe fallen, or that they've had things that have made them almost fall. They've almost fallen, because they don't want to lose their independence, and they don't want to have like their life change and whatever. Just so it's almost like athletes. If they really want to play, they're probably going to lie about their symptoms. If they don't really want to play, they're still probably going to lie about their symptoms. And an older person might actually do the same, because they don't lose their independence. And I'm not a 65-year-old guy yet, but like, maybe that is the thing. So anyway, that was one really cool thing, is like fall risk. And then you start looking in the data of fall risk. It's like, if you're if you're 80, if you're at least 80 and you fall and break your hip, your chances of
the mortality
rates, like,
rates associated with falls, it's like unbelievable.
Yeah, so
scary.
It's like,
and even gait speed. Gait speed is another indicator of mortality.
Yeah. So here, Kim, now you
wild.
go talk about that. I know you love it.
No, I mean, obviously that's definitely a huge piece, of the PT realm. And, he would talk to my students when I was a CI of, I got into PT because I really liked the sports aspect. I was an athlete, in high school. I got injured and was in a PT clinic and thought, oh, this is cool, I could do this. But, when the rest of PT, there's sports is just a small sliver, right? There is, geriatrics, pediatrics, inpatient hospital stuff, which, I've done I've done a lot of that too, because it's just such an interesting, so different than outpatient orthopedics. But, when it comes to, I guess, balance and cognition and, on the sway side, it's really, the options are endless of how you want to, use the tool. And, right now we obviously talk a ton about concussion, but we have, certainly all different types of folks using our platform for research and just for different uses in different patient populations, looking at folks with Parkinson's and how can obviously, cognition and balance play a huge role in that. Folks with Parkinson's deal a lot with tremors. So can our reaction time test that is, dependent on holding the device, does a tremor mess that up? Or, are these things that are, can we use technology to help other patient populations? Still in the head injury realm, but you can look at motor vehicle accidents. You can look at, we had a study at one point looking at folks that were involved in domestic violence, and how can, you again use technology to serve, those type of populations. And then, you get the cool ones, of course, the bull riders and the, different, realms in the sports world. But I think there's so much opportunity for, all different pathologies, really, because cognition and balance can fall into almost every, I don't know, pathology.
Every person.
I feel, yeah. It's just such a, huge part of human function. Those two things.
Yeah,
for sure.
We've got like military is one too, with like blast exposure. They use the word concussion differently than we do. They use MTBI. Concussion for them is like the reverb of an explosion. So I think the possibilities are pretty much endless.
So I know I personally use Sway, and I've taken it myself, and I use it with my athletes, but can you explain a little bit of what that cognition test looks like? Because I know like balance is a little bit easier to imagine for someone who does like a best like pen and paper.
Yeah.
But for like a cognitive test, what does that look like when you're testing cognition?
Yeah. So on the Sway side, we have kind of our core 4 cognitive tests that, in the sports concussion world, folks will take the MBES and then 4 different cognitive, modules. So reaction time, which is pretty self-explanatory in terms of that, just quick neuromotor response. And And then what comes after is called impulse control. And I love the relationship between those two. And I really love actually reaction time and impulse control, even for the older adult, because the impulse control test for anyone that's taken it is, a green check or a red X. Do I have to make a decision? Do I move the phone or hold it still? With the older adult, if they're driving, is it a green light or a red light? Am I crossing the street? Am I stopping? There's so many different factors, and now there's no direct correlations. There's no research to say if you're an older adult and you fail a sway test, you cannot drive. There's absolutely nothing like that. Maybe one day someone will do a study. But if you think about these different measures of cognition and relating them back to function, and even you could do the same in sports, you have the play call in your head, and you have to remember the play call. You have to think, are you going left, you going right, or whatever the scenario. And then, we have inspection time, which is, just more visual processing. So that quick, what you see, and then can you make a response after that? And then, a memory test, and memory is going to be important in older adults and sports. And obviously it's part of the SCAT-6. So, it covers kind of all those aspects of cognition.
Once you've kind of identified those kind of deficits, are there some interventions that can be done to kind of improve, like, say, reaction time or impulse control?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, it's really, a matter, it always comes back to like your understanding of like the anatomy, the physiology, and kind of the cause behind it. So we were talking about, just reaction time, and like, are you in the sports specific realm where you can, it's a lacrosse player and you can throw different colored balls and they have to catch it, and you're giving different commands of, well, I don't know. Like when I throw the red ball, you're going to name, 3 red foods. When I throw the yellow ball, you have to do, yellow or whatever. Or use your left hand and your right hand. I would use that a lot as with red and yellow, whether it's Post-its or Blaze Pods, you can, get it. You could choose the colors you want. So, red is right, yellow is left. And, you would have to use different hands. And that really challenge it. Again, it brings in so many different aspects of cognition. It's sometimes kind of hard in the intervention side to isolate. I'm only going to work on reaction time, or I'm only going to work on, this eye movement or something. Like when it comes to intervention, there's so many pieces that you're going to factor into what you're choosing for the intervention. And, it doesn't matter ATPT. Like I would always tell folks, as long as you have a rationale for why you're doing an intervention and you can relate it back to, whether it's something with the physiology, the anatomy of it, that's what matters. Like, there's so many fancy exercises and all these fancy things you see on Instagram, like in the rehab world. But, I'm going to sound like just an old granny PT here, but like the basics work too. Like you got to start simple. You don't have to get all these fancy, throwing tennis balls, Blaze Pods, blah, blah, blah. Like you don't have to be super fancy with that. If you start with the basics and get the brain and the body, talking, working together, that's how you build and get to the, the fancier, cooler interventions.
I will say that we do have a CEU coming up that kind of is going to talk about this. Stacy Ritter is going to be talking about like neuroplasticity and concussion recovery. And Becky Bliss did a talk at NATA that I actually got to help moderate, and I learned a lot of like those interventions that she has. And like Kim was saying, the reds and the greens and catching things with one hand or the other, and listing out like, here's this tool, and I bought it on Amazon for $5, like not super expensive. And it was just like, how athletic trainers are MacGyvers, right? You give us very little few things because we don't have a lot of money, and we'll make it work, right? Like we can't afford the cool stuff. We'll figure out a way to get, whatever we need or want to.
Literally, I mean, I've seen it where you take a roll of tape and you can write numbers on it, and you throw the roll of tape to the athlete and say, call out what number you see. I mean, there's so many ways to get creative of,
For sure.
If you see something that's cool or, a piece of equipment that you really want, but it's not in the budget this year, like think about the rationale behind the use of whatever it is. I mean, I didn't have Blaze Pods forever. I got them at one point. I was using Post-it notes and I was putting Post-it notes all over the place and giving the verbal commands of where to go. and drawing different letters on different colored Post-it notes. I mean, my clinic was a hot mess with Post-it notes.
There's so many cool things. Like I've seen bull riders that they're in a kneeling position on a exercise ball, on a physio ball, and they have to balance that way.
Oh my gosh.
Or they'll jump. People that jump up on it onto their feet, and they can hold it and they
Crazy.
stand on it. Like one of my former students from when I was in a high school setting, he was one of my high school student athletic training aides. He is now one of the athletic trainers for one of the professional bull riding teams, and they use blaze pods and they do all these really cool things that are very, very specific to like that athlete, right? And I had a guy who had a ballerina who was recovering from a concussion or an ankle sprain, and he was using blaze pods on the ground, and she would be on point and she would have to like move over and like touch the blaze pod with a foot, and then she'd move over, and like I was like, athletic trainers and PTs were pretty, smart when it comes to like those different things. But yeah, the resources, like and there was one thing I wanted to bring up was, like Kim said, if you can make sure that it matches the reason why you're doing it. And Becky had talked about the concussion profile screen, where if you can identify the different subtype of concussion it might be, then that might help you like go this direction with some of these therapeutic interventions. So just try and learn as much as you can and ask people questions and utilize the resources that you do have, not just monetary resources, but like Kim, your PT resources and your neuropsychologists and neurologists and all those different things.
Or your educational podcast resources.
Your educational podcasts. Exactly. Good plug there.
Thank you.
I think it's time for an action item.
Yes, I think so. Go for it.
What would you guys want the AT community to know about a system like Sway or some sort of cognitive testing, balance testing's use outside of a concussion?
I think, my favorite one, and we kind of alluded to this earlier, is, obviously if you have the time and resources and you're using Sway or you're, considering it as, implementing it in your setting, yes, it has the concussion utility for it, but you can, really think about prevention and performance with it. Looking at the individual balance stances and, looking at those left-right asymmetries, looking at the reaction time and realizing, wow, you're in a lower percentile than I expected you to be at for our starting wide receiver, things of that nature, like, using what you know of the team and your players, and then being able to, use the data to, help them perform better. So performance prevention.
I would say on the visual processing speed, like the inspection time tests, if you start seeing those normative data, those points being kind of low compared to norms, a simple question like, do you wear contacts or glasses, or have you ever been to the eye doctor? Like maybe you never have. And maybe that, I know I never went, and I found out in college I had astigmatisms in both eyes. Maybe that's why I couldn't hit the baseball. So there's that. Yeah. But I agree 100% with what Kim said.
So after going through this interview, now I have like all these ideas, and now I'm like super excited to like use like what we use for like concussion testing for maybe musculoskeletal stuff.
Yeah, I feel like it's something that you have accessible, and you have profiles. I mean, if you are doing like a mobile-based app, like you have access to it.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I feel like now, because there are, more mobile kind of apps coming out for this, like it's so accessible now. Like I feel like it's a lot easier to try and like work with it on a day-to-day than just like some of the older systems where it was really like tied down and it's so specific for like only for concussion.
Right. I mean, just an example, like we do use Sway at my school, and one of the things that I really like about it is, like Kim was talking about, there's like the different modules of tests. So it always starts with the balance, and like if you do the whole like profile, it starts with the balance and has the 4 core like memory, inspection time, reaction time, like stuff like that. And then there's what I really like about it is like as soon as they take the test, it gives you like a chart, but it also gives you like a percentage of increase or decrease compared to their baseline.
Oh, that's cool.
So someone like I had an athlete who post concussion was down 129% on reaction time. And so then a little bit, like once he became a little bit more asymptomatic, we had him take it again, and he was down by 22% on reaction time.
Nice.
So then I was like, okay, now like he's a little bit less symptomatic.
Yeah.
We can start incorporating some reaction time into his rehab.
Mm-hmm.
So even though like we were still making it through the protocol, like I was able to use blaze pods like Kim was talking about, and we were just doing like some, you know, just colors, like I only want you to hit if it's blue, or like let's see how fast you can hit the pink one, and then like even if I just set the blaze pods up like right in front of him, or like turn around, and then you have to turn around and hit one.
Yeah.
And so like there's a lot of things that we were able to do to work on his reaction time so that he was able to get back to full like baseline.
Yeah, no, I like that too. And kind of what we brought it up is like using that to kind of guide your treatments and rehab. I thought that's a really cool idea. Like you can actually have an objective number on deficits, again, whether it's concussion or not, right? You can see where a deficit may be and okay, how can we adjust that? I also like the aspect of, hey, you may not, you know, you may be starting it for like a musculoskeletal thing, but you might find an underlying like just unhealed concussion.
Right.
Like that, I thought that was a nice story at the beginning of it. That kind of just shows the importance of, hey, even if someone may walk in, you don't know.
Right.
Right.
And even beyond this, like even if you're able to notice that someone's like working on reaction time or something, you don't have to have all these fancy tools.
True.
You could just do like post-it notes, or you could just like call out numbers, or have them like dual tasking sort of things.
For sure.
So there's so much that you could do with it, and this is just the beginning.
Weird. It's funny. It's almost like we talked about resources a lot.
That sounds familiar. But anyway, we do have every episode of our podcast kind of differing between story episodes or education episodes or interview episodes like this one. So make sure you check those different types of episodes out. Our education episodes are also worth CEUs. Thank you to Clinically Pressed and Athletic Training Chat. So make sure you check those out. If you guys are interested in getting some CEUs, some of them are free. So make sure you check those out. And then we also have story episodes where we bring stories from athletic trainers all over the world, and we synthesize them into one topic and kind of talk about one various aspect of our crazy jobs.
Yes.
So if you want to submit stories for that, make sure you go to our Instagram at AT Corner Podcast. Thank you so much again to Sway for being on our podcast. And we have so much more for you in the show notes below, including a promo code for MedBridge. Do you have anything else to add, Randy?
Nope, that was perfect. Thank you for helping us showcase athletic training behind the tape. Bye.